Hello and welcome to another episode in the How Do I Do Something in CloudBolt video series. In today's video, we're going to be talking through how do I set up the VMware collector in CloudBolt. Normally I do a background slide for this. This one's pretty straightforward. We're going to deploy the VMware collector for the CloudBolt Cloud Financial Management capability, which allows us to connect to an on-premise VMware vCenter or Cloud VMware vCenter. It facilitates communication between our FinOps capability to a vCenter in our environment. So this will allow us to go through and pull statistics about all of the resources provisioned out there, gather, power on, power off dates, how many CPUs, RAM, memory, storage were all allocated to our resources. But this will get deployed inside of your VMware environment. It will then connect to your vCenter endpoint, and then it will take the data that we're parsing from VMware and pass it up to the Cloud Financial Management capability. All right, so we're going to walk through the process to deploy the CSMP VMware collector. I'm at the CloudBolt docs page. We're actually going to go to the CMP documentation here. And the reason for that is really the collector or the satellite for CSMP actually is the cloud management platform. So we're going to cover this from the context of not being a current CMP customer. So we're going to set this up without a license and just kind of walk through things that way. When you get to the CMP page, you can just look for collector. Here's the documentation for the updated pieces for the collector. Then if we go through, so it doesn't give us a download link. So what we're going to do is just back up a little bit here. If we scroll all the way to the top, we can go to Getting Started with CloudBolt. From here, we can go to Installing CloudBolt. And then from here, we should be able to access the download article to get the most up-to-date release for the CloudBolt CMP. So if I go to 2024.1, it should have the most up-to-date version. I'm going to go ahead and find the right version. I'm going to deploy an OVA. So this is something specifically for VMware. So I'm just going to go ahead and download that file. That's going to take a minute to go through. This process should also work if you're installing on a Linux, Enterprise Linux 8 compliant system. We do currently support Red Hat as well as Oracle Enterprise Linux. If you don't have a subscription manager, I would suggest Oracle Enterprise Linux as your base operating system. We can get Red Hat working without subscription manager, but it's just a little bit more work to get going. So I'm going to pause this for a second while we're downloading, and I'll be back here just shortly. So file's downloaded now. We're going to go ahead and deploy the OVA in my VMware environment. So I'm just going to do deploy OVF template. One note that I think a customer ran into recently is with VMware, you do have to be at a supported version of VMware. We had a customer try to deploy the other day on 6.7. VMware hasn't supported that since October of 2022. So you just need to make sure that you're deploying in a vCenter that's, as of today, supports virtual hardware version 19, which would be ESXi 7 and up. So, okay, so local file, I'm going to go ahead and upload. Let's see. This is the latest, so that should be my OVA. And I think there's a selection from what I've read in the documentation. This is my first time going through this as well, so we're getting to learn together. There should be some additional settings towards the end that ask us what kind of mode it's in is what I'm thinking I'm hearing, but we'll see in just a second. Okay, additional options. Okay, so I'm just going to deploy to a data store. I'd want thin provisioned. This is entirely up to you. That doesn't have any implication on what we're doing here. I'm going to select a DHCP network. I don't actually see an option for setting it up as a CSMP only. So not part of an OVA setting, which we're going to kick that off and just look at the documentation real quick. Collector can be configured in one of two ways. If you are a CSMP license, I think we intend to say CMP licensed customer, so I'll get that resolved. Then configuration can be done using standard CloudBolt administration UI. If you only have a CSMP license, you need to deploy the CloudBolt CMP appliance in collector mode and use management commands. Okay, so I think to run in collector mode, we need to make these settings on the CloudBolt appliance. So let's just see where that's at. Probably be a few minutes. I'm going to go ahead and pause while it's finishing this up, and then we'll jump back in here in a minute. Okay, so it finally deployed. I'm realizing that I missed the name change. I do this more often than I'd like to admit, so I'm just going to change the name of the virtual machine so I know what it's being used for. I need a rename option. There we go. So before I even power it on, I just want to make sure it's renamed. I don't know if we're using that in the guest OS or not, but to me that's helpful. I'm going to go ahead and power the virtual machine on. There are a couple of ways you can configure this. I'm not sure if DHCP will actually work, so I may have to switch networks here in a minute. But if you need a static IP, it's not going to be in this set of instructions. You would need to go back to the basic instructions for the CloudBolt CMP appliance. So getting started with CloudBolt. Installing, then you want to go to deploy the CloudBolt OVM from OVA, and from here under the deploying CloudBolt section, it's kind of bouncing around a little bit. So getting started, installing, then deploying. With deploy a virtual appliance, what you have is the instructions for setting a static IP address. So the first login, you should be, and it says it can be skipped if you're using it in a DHCP environment. But you can log into the virtual machine console, and then it will actually prompt you, and you're logging in as a root user. You should probably change the root user password, but it will prompt you to set an IP address on your first login to the appliance. So pretty straightforward to do, not super challenging. I'm going to check one thing real quick. You don't have to do this. Actually, in most cases, I would recommend not. But what you should see is that there is a UI up and running, but we're not necessarily going to do anything with this. This is an expected condition. You will be prompted for a license file for the CSMP collector. This is not, we're not going to use a CMP license here, which is what this is asking for. What we're going to do is we're actually going to set the settings from our virtual machine here. So I'm going to pause for just a second. I'm going to switch back to my desktop. This is on a VM in my lab. It helps with uploading OVA speeds, but I'll be back in just a second. All right, I am back on my normal desktop, but what I'm going to do from here, I'm going to grab my IP address for the server again. I'm going to open an SSH connection to the server. Now we'll try it with the correct IP. We should get right in. Okay, so this is what you should see if you went through the static IP address the setup of the static IP address. I can just cancel out of this. There's a way to snooze this and dismiss this altogether. I don't recall what that is offhand, so we're not going to cover that. But probably as part of our knowledge base articles, you can find this. So I'm going to skip the application setup, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start running through these commands here. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add this setting in our customer settings.py file. I'm going to copy the file location first. And then what I can do is just go to edit that file. So you can see we're in that file. I'm just going to switch to insert mode, add an additional line, and then I'm going to copy the setting itself and go back over to special characters in there. There we go. And I'm going to exit insert mode. I'm going to :right quit. That saves my file. So the file setting has now been made. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through this command to create the base CMP objects. And this will actually go out and initialize the database, start creating the objects that we need here. I think this does take 2 to 3 or 4 minutes to go through this process. Oh, never mind. I lied. So that's not too bad at all. What I am thinking, because I was with a customer last night where they reran that command, I would check one thing. You do want to be sure that your virtual appliance has at least the 4 CPUs and 16 gigs of RAM. If it doesn't, maybe that could potentially cause some errors as well. So just make sure you have enough resources on this before running those commands. Now, the last thing that this says to do is to go ahead and restart our job engines. I'm going to run the command. And then it should show that the job engine has started. All right, I am going to go through the static IP configuration as well. A member of my team let me know that there was an additional configuration setting that you run into when you go through the static IP configuration. So I've actually deployed another OVA for the CloudBolt collector. This OVA, it is on a network that needs a static IP address. So we're going to go ahead and just log back in. The default login information. One of the things that you'll notice here, I'm going to go ahead and set name. I don't even know what range I'm on. 10.116.3. Forget you can't use the number keys, number pad. What's going on here? There we go. And I don't know what IP address I want. I'll go with 88. .116.3.88. My keyboard is it's not playing very nicely. Then 10.116. 3.1. I keep typing in here instead of pressing enter. Up there. All right, and then appliance mode. So here's the extra switch here, is this appliance mode selector. So instead of doing CMP, I am going to select. I selected CSMP. Why did it not? Oh, you got to hit a space bar to toggle that asterisk. Now that I've hit the space bar, you can see CSMP collector is the selected option. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK and apply configuration and exit. I wasn't on the right thing. So now what it's doing, it's going out and it's actually, I believe the commands that we ran before. So we'll go through and check this here in just a minute, but I think there you go. There's a command that we ran. It's already gone, but doing the minimal setup of CloudBolt. So it's running that command on our behalf. I would bet that the other settings are also functional as well. So I'll pause it for a second, let it come back up, and then I'll access it by IP and we'll pick back up from there. All right, it's rebooted, it's back up, it's available. So the first thing I'm going to check is my customer settings files. Opt, CloudBolt, ProServe, and then customer settings.py. I don't see the setting in here. Oh, there it is. CSMP data collector enabled. So that was set. The other thing that it had us set early on was run the CB minimal. That's already been performed. I think the one thing I am going to do, so one of the things I ran into with the customer was the job engine wasn't restarting. I think we're good to go, but let's just verify. As long as the job engine comes up, we should be okay to run our commands. So let's just quit that. Stop successfully. And restart it. So I think we're good to go. So this is the easier route. If you're doing the static IP option, just be sure to select the CSMP mode prior to putting your, or as part of putting your IP address in. If you don't, you should still be able to run these commands that are shown in the documentation and get you back to the point to where we can then move forward and actually register with our CSMP and our vCenters that we'll be heading to next here. Just going to launch. This is a new instance of the cost platform. I'm going to go over to my adapters. And this is an old one I was testing with earlier. I'm just going to delete it real quick. We don't need that anymore. So we can go from the process from scratch. Okay, so VMware adapters. I'm going to add a cloud adapter here for VMware. And create a new one. Just need to give it a name here. Now that we have the name, go back to VMware. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get an API key here in just a second. And we're going to follow these commands as needed. So I'm going to start by capturing that portion of the code. So there's my command, and then I'm going to need my URL to this instance, everything up to that first slash. And then we're going to need, of course, it captured the slash, even though I didn't copy it. And then we need API key. Why did I click on the wrong thing? Too many windows. And then I'm going to grab an API key. So to get your API key, you're going to generate access keys here. You'll copy the key, put it into your clipboard, and then when you come over, you can paste that in your command. Go ahead and run the command. Perfect. Configuration is now created. Let's go ahead and do I want to list these now because we're going to need the ID for that connection here in just a minute. So here we go. Here's my command for listing those connections. Okay, so here's my CMP connection or CSMP connection. I need to then, the next thing I'm going to need to do is go through and create the VMware connections. And I do that under the VMware section. So we're going to create a new VMware connection. And I'm just going to copy this. Go over to VMware create hosts. Is going to be there we go. I'm going to give this a username and a password. I'll probably just pause this for a second. I'm going to put this command in. If there's anything that's out of the ordinary, I'll point that out when I come back. But it should just go through, execute the command, and say that this is set up successfully. All right, that just showed VMware configuration successfully created. So we can also go back through and list that to be sure, to see, make sure that is working. Okay, so we have our VMware connection. The next step that we're going to want to set up is going to be a synchronization job. And this will go through, I think we need to create a job, and then we need to ensure that it's enabled. So I'm going to go back through. I'm going to list my adapters again since I cleared that. Then after that prints, I'm going to get everything but the ID. And is it for, oh, it's for the resource handler itself. Okay. So here, the config ID is actually the VMware config that we're going to use. So for every VMware vCenter that you're trying to connect to, you're going to need to first create the connection to that vCenter, and then you're going to need to create a recurring job that goes out and inventories that vCenter. So I actually need the ID, not of the CSMP connection, but I need the VMware, which I already have up there. So we're good. You're good to go. So recurring job, there's my resource handler ID. Let's create the recurring job. That must have created it. You know what? I didn't go through and do the recurring job list. So let's try that first. And it looks enabled as well. So we don't have to create it or enable it. It looks like just by setting up the resource handler connection that it should be going out, running and running. Let's see. Do I need to do a run now? I'm going to do a list jobs command. I want to see if it's run yet. So these are probably just good steps to go through regardless. Okay, so no jobs have run yet, so I'm going to run that run now command. This should just kick it off. This will also, I don't know how frequently we're scheduling this, but it should be going out on a schedule as well. Maybe once an hour, maybe once a day. I'm not entirely sure how often we'll run this, but it will start to kick off periodically. All right, so it's kicked off the job. Let's just go back to list jobs and see if it'll show the status now. Here we go, it's running. So this should take, I would assume, because I think what we're doing under the covers is similar to what CloudBolt does natively in the CMP capability. I would assume this is going to take about maybe a minute. So I'm going to pause real quick and I'll just keep querying this to see if I can find out when it's done. There we go. It looks like it already ran, it executed. It took all of about 50 seconds. I don't have a ton of virtual machines, maybe a couple hundred in my vCenter, so pretty quick. The larger the scale in the environment, the longer I anticipate this taking. Let's go back over to our CloudBolt instance. Let's see if this is showing a little differently now. So configured, okay, last synced, so that's a start. The next thing we have to do is ensure that we set up the rate card here. So create rate card, CPU cost. I'm just gonna put some made up numbers in here. Let's say 0.01. We can always update that beyond this. The disk multiplier. I don't know that I really want to do a disk multiplier, do I? Well, let's just select all of these. Oh, you know what? I bet we can, nope, doesn't like that at all. I'm just going to select a single data store. I just want the basic disk cost. I'm not sure why this appears optional. Rate time currency unit, I'm going to do per month. And then I'm going to do US dollar, save that as a rate card. And then if we go back over to our adapter again, there we go. It's no longer red. So it shows that the things that we're reliant on are available here. We should start to see some data pulled in. Okay, so this is a time period collection. So we don't have statistics for these workloads prior to today, I assume, but I could be wrong. Let's see if we see any resources in Service Manager yet. There we go. So it's showing our resources now. And I think that moving forward, this is able to query, if we're doing it once an hour, it should tell what resources and workloads are powered on at what periods of time throughout that. And as these start to accrue costs, we should start to see costs populate in these dashboards. So hopefully that was helpful. Just a real quick walkthrough of how to get this set up, the CSMP collector, without having CMP as a front end. So we went through install, we went through running the commands, and now have it functioning in our environment.